for joining us. I'm your hostess, Kayla Byers, and this is Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. This season, we will see two debaters go head-to-head in an impromptu battle of wits and passion. Each week, we will have a new judge to adjudicate the round, and by the end of the season, we will crown the winner. If you'd like to hear a bit more information about how debate works, check out our previous intro video. The link is in the description box. With each round, we hope to equip you with the tools necessary to be a critical thinker.
Our illustrious debaters, Leah Johnson and Jeanelle Hope, will be joined today by the adjudicator, Michael Perkins. Michael is from the west side of Detroit, Michigan. He is one half of Opinions Are Like podcast, which he co-hosts with his brother, Vince Perkins. Here, they discuss relationships, books, and culture in a comedic and introspective way. He is also the host of My Punk Ass podcast, where he discusses his personal take on Black culture, including finance, marriage, fatherhood, and Black agenda and solutions. Let's go ahead and get this round started. Thank you so much for tuning in to Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. I am your host, Leah, and I have my opponent with me today, Jeanelle. Thank you for coming. And our judge for today is Mike Perkins. Thank you, Mike, for showing up.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so our topic is...
Yep, it is correct.
All right, so we have 15 minutes of prep. Let us know when the 15 minutes start, and then you would just give us like 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left, 2 minutes left, that kind of stuff.
All right. And go. All right. Janelle's the gov, right?
Yes, I am.
All right. We're going to start. Let's see. We're going to start at 6 minutes for Jeanelle. All right.
Yes.
Ready? Go.
Ready? All right. Good afternoon. I first like to thank my opponent, as well as Mike, for being here, serving as our judge and our timekeeper for today. Our resolution for today is the Black community needs a leader to move forward. We're going to start with a little bit of resolutional analysis, and first with the definitions, and then go on to some values and values criteria. So first, I'm defining the Black community as people of African descent located in the United States. Needs, we're going to take that as is needing, necessitating, must have. A leader, we're going to define a leader as a central figure or key organization that can help organize a group of people. And in this case, that group of people are people of African descent located in the United States. And to move forward, we're going to define that phrase there as progress in the direction to advance Black liberation. Okay, so that's my definitions. The value that we're going to work with today is quality of life, as the goal is to eradicate white supremacy and advance Black liberation, which would be a quality of life enhancement for all Black people located in the United States. And the criteria that we're going to be using is qualitative analysis, but also some empirical analysis. And so with that, I'm going to jump right on into my first contention, an argument, which is one. Historically, Black people have ushered in the most advancements. And when I'm talking about advancements, I'm talking about with regards to civil rights, with regards to Black liberation, with regards to the eradication of racism and white supremacy in this country, during social movements that have been shepherded by key or central leaders and or organizations, right? And so I want us to think back historically through some of our history and some of the leaders that we can think of. I'm thinking of W.B. Du Bois. I'm thinking of a Booker T. Washington. If we're thinking about the early 1900s, I'm thinking about going into the 1930s and 40s, Ella Baker. I'm thinking about Septima Clark. I'm thinking thinking about Malcolm X. I'm thinking about Martin Luther King Jr. I'm thinking about Stokely Carmichael. I'm thinking more into the 80s and into the 90s. I'm thinking about Black feminists like Audre Lorde coming in today. I'm thinking about Black Lives Matter leaders like Patrice Cullors and so forth, right? Organizations, we can talk about the NAACP. We can talk about the Civil Rights Congress. We can talk about BLM and its various chapters. We can talk about the various chapters of Black Panther Party, right? These key figures and or organizations have helped mobilize, mobilize people, base build, create agendas and priorities. They're charismatic leaders. They've helped fundraise. They provided a representation to be able to negotiate with world leaders. And in the absence, and when we don't have these leaders, what we've seen is that the Black community and mass organizing is really stunted. Right? In the absence of these leaders, it becomes really lifeless. You need these folks to be able to progress on. So that's the contention number one. Contention number two is that leaders, again, we're defining them as central figures and or organizations. They help create a unified front and Black agenda, right? Meaning that these leaders create messages, taglines that we latch onto, like Black Power, Ungawa, like power to the people, like boycott. They create these unified messages that we are able to rally around. Black Lives Matter, abolish the police, defund, divest, that we can latch onto that become rallying cries. They're universal, right? They help unify us. They bring us together. They help distill our movements into priorities, right? And movements must have unity. Leaders and central organizations provide that unity, right? That unity is necessary in order to have any constructive or progressive social movement within this country and really globally. And my third point is that leaders create organic organizational structures and principles. They also then help leave a legacy by reproducing their own leadership skills throughout the organizations, right? And so I want to give sort of two examples of what I mean. We can reflect on some of the leadership of more hierarchical organizations, like the NAACP, which operate still democratically, where everyone's voice is being heard and they have an opportunity to vote. But there's still a leader sort of at the top, right? I even think of the Black Panther Party, which operated somewhat hierarchically, but still had various chapters across the country that operated semi-autonomously, right? So you have that organizational structure. We need structure within social movements. You need to know who's going to be your person who's doing media, right? Who's going to be working on the newspaper? Who's going to be out there feeding the children and doing mutual aid? Who's going to be out there actually giving the speeches? Who's going to be organizing the direct actions? Who's going to make sure we have, transportation? Who's going to be the ones securing bail? All these sorts of folks. Leaders help provide that organizational structure because they're visionaries. Oftentimes, leaders are visionaries. They come with the vision and also gain some of that vision from the people that they work with. They work with these people because they were able to mobilize and bring them to the table, inspire them, right? And so a hierarchical organizational structure is one that oftentimes exists. There's also democratic leadership, right? I think of Ella Baker, who said she wanted to see a movement that was leaderful, right? And so she didn't always stay at the front. She said, young Stokely, you come up behind me, you start speaking, and then you talk to other folks and you get them to also become leaders, right? So leaders inspire other people to be leaders. And that leaves a lasting legacy for us to be able to have a movements that are able to continue on and on and on, right? So leaders inspire us. They're visionaries. They create unified messaging for us. And historically, our people have thrived and created the most progress under leaders like Fred Hampton, under leaders like the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, and so on and so forth. So I urge a government vote. The Black community needs a leaderful movement in order to be able to move forward. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. We're going to go off case and on case. Let me know when my time starts.
Your clock starts now, Leah.
Thank you very much to my opponent, Jeanelle, for setting up a case. Thank you to Mike for being our judge and timekeeper today. I'm going to go off case, then on case, starting with my two off and then go back on. My first off is being Black is not a monolith. We are a spectrum. There's different needs at different areas that need to be met. So we have to focus more on the ideologies as opposed to a leader, a person to look at. It is more important to look at the school of thought as opposed to the thought of a single person. because if we look at a single person, they can be negotiated away for silver or gold. If we think of people who have the ability to have followers or leadership, significant leadership in their community, you think of people like Candace Owens, you think of people like Kanye West, who continuously lead people with their destructive discourse. We think of people. I think of people like this having destructive discourse, and that's why it's better to have an ideal that is flexible and changing, that we can revisit with maturity and wisdom once we see that there's progress being made. The progress that we need should be the progress that we strive for in Black liberation should be for a school of thought that can be revisited. To put this into perspective, you think of school of thought as progressive and universal, and the thought of a person is about ego, and it's based on personal experience. When you think of school of thought, you can think of racism is a byproduct of white supremacy that must be rejected at all costs. However, you think of the thought of a person. Lil Wayne says that he has never experienced racism as a Black man in America. So if we have people who are leaders, we have people who are basing their experiences off of what the Black people as a community should strive for. However, when we have the school of thought, when we have people who work in ideologies as progression, as opposed to working as we're focusing on this person, focus on what they think we need, and for them to give back to what we need in each community is more important. To develop more critical thinkers, we need people who have the ideology of moving forward for whatever that means for that community. Moving on to my next point. Yes, the Black community needs leadership, not just a leader or a single person organization to look to. Having a person having a person to look toward is who is fallible always leads to division, because we don't give people the opportunity, especially in the social media age, to mess up. You think of people like Nikki Giovanni, you think of people like MLK, think of people like Marcus Garvey. All these people had critics on both sides who would say, yes, they're right, no, they're wrong. And that causes more division. But if we have an ideology, we empower people to think for themselves, to think about what issues they can face, and they can come up with solutions for their community. If instead of looking to those people, looking specifically to those people, we can look to what they're being led by, whether it be their Christian, whether it be their Christian values, whether it be their freedom of thought values, whether it be their critical thinking values, whether it be their values of family or economic empowerment, political empowerment. If we look to what that looks like, we can take on the opportunity to build that up for ourselves in our own communities, instead of looking for organizations that may step over small people. It always starts with the grassroots, so that we can be able to succeed on a whole. Looking at a person means that we have a static notion of what morals are, without accounting for what progress has already been made and where we have accomplished and where we need to go. We're always looking for progress, not perfection. On to Case. So the first point that she made is that that social movements were successful when we had key figures in place. There were some movements, but it started with people together having this idea of, if we want to look at the rebellions that happened when there were enslaved Africans across the world, the rebellions only worked because people came together to have an idea of what they want to focus on. They want to focus on the progress. There are some people who remain stagnant now because they think that since we are not where we were 50 years ago, we have somehow achieved some sort of freedom or some sort of level of success. But because we look to these figures, some people get stuck in, oh, I'm too old to move on, or they don't have a legacy that has been passed down. They get stuck in that movement. So instead, we have to move forward and looking at the ideology. Point number 2 she made was that it helps create a unified Black agenda. However, because if you cross-apply my point that said being Black is not a monolith, we have to have different schools of thought for different people. Like, what I need in my life is not going to be the same thing that what another person needs in another area. We are all in different states right now. Janelle's in Texas. I'm in Charlotte. You're in Michigan. There's different things needed for different communities. And so having a person who is not in that area or from that place does not tell me what it is as far as, quote unquote, the Black agenda of what we need. We have to come together and see what we need in our communities first, in our leadership and the ideas that we strive for, and then come up with the solution on our own. The third point she made is that leadership Leadership creates organizations and legacy. Well, we see what happens if we look at the NAACP, which is not necessarily, it's kind of still has Black people in it, I guess, not really, but there's not really much that it has done for the Black community by and large. When is the last time the NAACP made news? Where were they when? Where were they right before the? Even now, you think about like Black Lives Matter did start, yes, but it started with a person, with a group, but now their agenda has changed by and large to focus more on one small part of the Black community, because they're focusing on the LGBTQIA plus and not everyone else. And so because there are certain entities within the Black community that actually need help, everybody is being looked over. So if we have an ideology as a Black community of what we're striving for, then that will be much better, as opposed to looking at one person or one individual and their egotistical thought of what they think success looks like to the Black community as a whole. And with that, I yield my time.
I think you had 20 more seconds.
I forgot what color pen I used for you. I think it's black. Oh, here it is.
All right.
I'm ready when you are. Ready?
Yes, you got 4 minutes starting now.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with the opposition's case. Their first point being Black is not a monolith, right? She's arguing that we need to not focus on ideologies, right, and the singular thought of the thought of a singular person. However, I want to challenge you. Where does ideology come from? Do we think it just comes from out of the air or books? It comes from people. It comes from leaders, right? We don't have something like Pan-Africanism without W.B. Du Bois. Right? We don't have Black power as a phrase, as a theory, without Stokely Carmichael being a leader. Right? We don't have Black Lives Matter as a rallying cry without Patrice Opal and Alicia Garza. Right? So ideology, even the notion of Black liberation, we don't have that without Marcus Garvey. You need leaders in order to have ideology. It doesn't just come out of the sky. It's like philosophy. Philosophy is written by people, Althusser, Kant, folks. So to say that ideology is solely the belief of a singular person is false. Ideology is something that's written by a person that is informed by their communities, informed by history, their experiences, through research. W.B. Du Bois was a sociologist, one of the first or early African Americans to earn a PhD in sociology. This is completely dismissive of what ideology is. It's academic. It's built upon leaders. So that's the first point. Second point, leadership needs to not be a single. And before I go off to that, they also talked about leaders can lead folks into destruction. Mind you, they mentioned some of the most anti-Black people. Right? When I defined we need leaders to move Black people forward, it's towards Black liberation. And I said that. So to bring in Candace Owens and Kanye West, who doesn't even believe that slavery was not voluntary, is ridiculous. And that should be completely stricken out. Those folks are anti-Black and they have decided to side with whiteness. And we need to completely dismiss them from the conversation. Number two, leadership needs to not be a single person or organization. I said this, right? I said that leadership is also organizations which are informed by multiple people, central and key organizations. The Black Panther Party, for example, right? Multiple chapters, lots of people who are created this central organization, right? You also said maybe we should look at their Christian values. We need to look at things. Christian values come from Jesus and the disciples who were leaders. Every book in the Bible is named after a disciple and or somebody who was key in Jesus's home. They was homeboys in his squad. So you don't have Christian values without Jesus's people, his homeboys and the leaders, right? Grassroots is not being about, singular. Again, this goes back to my point. I mentioned organizations who comprise the grassroots. Now they went to my own case, right? They talked about, there were rebellions, right? During, enslavement. Yes, rebellions were led by people. Harriet Tubman shepherded hundreds of people out. A leader. Nat Turner, a leader. Abolitionist organizations like the Quakers, right? Key figures, leaders. Two, unified Black agenda. It doesn't have to be singular. We need rallying cries, but that doesn't mean that it has to be monolithic or singular. We can say Black Lives Matter, and that also means Black queer lives, Black trans lives, Black male lives, Black women lives, right? But we need something to rally around. So yes, we do need a unified agenda. And then this whole point to be very dismissive of the NAACP and the BLM saying they solely focus on LGBTQI issues, this is just false. It's false. I yield the rest of my time, and I'll have my voter issues in my last speech.
All right. Okay, we got Leah with 6 minutes starting now.
All right. I'm gonna go off case the same path that I did before, off case and on case. So first, her first response to being Black is not a monolith, and that leaders birth ideologies. I did not negate this at all. What I said was, in order for us to get to solutions, and I think this is where the argument is kind of getting lost, is that in order for us to get to solutions, which is what the resolution states, that the community needs Black leaders in order to move forward, and she defined it as the Black community is African descent, for centralized organization for the advancement of Black liberation. To get to the solution, we do not need Black leaders or people to look up to. We need schools of thought that we can focus on, places of points that we can look to and say, look, this is how far we come, this is what we value, and this is how we're moving forward. Having a roundtable discussion about that and what we need in each community is going to be more important than looking to a single person to say this single person has all of the answers for every community represented in the United States of America. That is my argument. That is what I'm saying. Do not let her misconstrue my argument saying that it is more important for a single person to solve for everything. No, to get to the solutions, we need more than one person. We need more than one person to look at everything, because if we have people like Lil Wayne, if we have people like Kanye West, if we have people, even if Beyonce was at the table herself, she would not be able to get to the point of solution with anybody else there, because of the amount of voices that we have and the amount of needs that we have in the Black community. We need more than one person. The second argument that she made on my second point, the Black community needing that leadership is organizations. No, the Black Panther Party worked so well because they stayed in their community. To have the Black Panther Party represent the whole Black community of the United States of America would be more detrimental than anything else. It is more important that each community come together and focus on an ideology. Yes, the Christian values are based on the teachings of Christ. However, that was just an example. We could have other things. I also said family. I also said financial freedom. I also said political power. These are the ideals. These are the values that we focus on. And by focusing on these values, we can come together in each community and focus on how we want to build. It should not be up to a single organization like the NAACP, like the Black Lives Matter movement, to tell us how we live our lives. They can't tell me what to do in my community while focusing on the community at large. It is going to be more important that we focus on, for the solutions, to have an ideology to focus on. If we say Black Lives Matter, if we say Black Power, if we say that we're focusing on Black people as a spectrum, then that solution needs to come from those specific communities and not just looking to a single person to have a solution for all of those. So then she said that I brought up the most anti-Black people. These are people who have significant followings in the Black community, and they think that they are getting Black liberation. They're freeing Black people from thinking that the Democrats or liberals are for them. They are very sure. If you listen to any of the PragerU Candace Owens speeches, she is so sure that she is getting Black people to think that liberation is toward conservatism. And so, moving on to the on case, she tries to extend her arguments to talk about abolitionists being leaders and rebellions coming from single persons. And we need rallying cries and all. Listen, cross-apply the argument being Black is not a monolith. To get to solutions, we need people to come together for an ideology. We need people to come together to support something. And the way we do that is getting together and them talking. Black Lives Matter did not just come into, or NAACP did not just come, or even the SCLC. It didn't just come in a dream. It was people talking in the community saying, what can we do for our community to make it better, to reach Black liberation? If we want the advancement of Black people, if we want the advancement economically, socially, politically, or what have you, if we want that, we have to start in our communities. We can't just say, oh, this one pastor, this one person, this one thing, because when we have that, we have situations where we have staged events, not saying that it's not significant, but having a story buried where it was a 15-year-old who actually sat on the bus first, as opposed to Rosa Parks. That's what we have. But if we have our own people who are creating these solutions, who are looking toward an ideology and not a person, that is where we find real liberation. That's where we find real advancement. That's where we find the empowerment to actually move forward. And with that, I yield my time.
Okay. All right. And then we have Jeanelle with 3 minutes, and we're gonna start now.
All right, I'm going to just hop right into my voter issues. Voter issue number 1 is that opposition just does not present a strong case. And they truly just do not provide any evidence of when the Black community not having a leader or key or central organization has truly helped advance Black liberation. And so that gets me to voter issue number 2 for me, is that I provided empirical evidence as well as contemporary examples illustrating how Black people have gained the most with regards to civil rights, with regards to addressing voter suppression, with regards to addressing white supremacy, issues of gender as it impacts Black women and queer folks through the civil rights movement, abolitionist movement, BLM, etc. And that has oftentimes happened under the stewardship of Black leaders and or central organizations. It's the reality. We can pick up our history books. We can turn on our Twitter profiles today. You're not going to see hashtags of individual people's names who are producing their own schools of thought or ideology, whatever it may be that the government, the opposition, I believe, is saying. You're going to see BLM. You're going to see hashtag, Black Power, hashtag these things that are rallying cries that have come from movements that have been led by people. Voter issue number 2 is that we have to have unity in ideology and school of thought. And that comes from leaders and it comes from organizations. And it is not always monolithic. W.B. Du Bois did not agree with Booker T. Washington. They presented 2 different types of ideologies and they bumped heads with each other. Well, women within the Black Panther Party did not necessarily agree with some of the men, right? Some of them left and they began to talk about other issues that impacted Black women, right? So this whole issue of monolithic thought is moot, because even amongst leaders, you can have disidentification, and that's important because it helps create a much more fuller movement, a richer movement that begins to address the needs of everyone. And my voter issue number 3 is we truly need someone or an organization that can package the experiences of Black people in a way that's digestible, that can be heard by the masses beyond Black people, that can be heard globally, that can be a rallying cry. So people truly understand what it is that we are going through and why we are fighting for Black liberation. That doesn't happen if each of us individually is doing our own little thing as lay people. It happens when you have a central organization. It happens when you have a leader that is able to bring folks together, mobilize them, have them on a similar agenda where we're walking in stride and we're on one accord, right? But where our differences are still recognized and maintained. And so I urge a government vote.
Okay.
All right, so you have 2 minutes to deliberate and then let us know who you voted for and why.
Okay. My time starts now.
Okay.
While the judge is reviewing the cases presented, you should take this opportunity to share, like, and subscribe. You know, all the YouTube things. Who do you think won this round? Let me know in the comments down below. And the results are in.
All right. So, going through both. Oh, I'm on. By the way, going through both points, I would have to give it to Leah. The reason that I start off and I give it to Leah is because your Jeanelle, your initial definition of leader almost, it didn't disqualify your argument, but your definition of a leader made it to where it wasn't focused on the actual question or the actual topic, which is a leader. So you define it as a leader being a central figure or groups, and looking at the actual topic, you're making it as if the argument is groups, and again, not leaders, like not a leader, because it's saying a leader. So it's starting off as a leader, and you're going to groups of people, which Black people aren't a monolith. That's obvious. So if you have schools of thought, which comes from groups of people coming together, then that makes it to where you have more of ideology, more of this ideal of, like, let's say freedom. Freedom is just that's an idea. Freedom is an idea. If everybody's going toward freedom, you may have people like Nat Turner. You have people like Harriet Tubman. You're gonna have people that are leading rebellions. But the idea of freedom is what actually pushes them to come out and be leaders. We don't need one central leader. We need one central idea. Also, when you went to disqualifying people like, well, basically entertainers, people who are more so entertainers like your Lil Waynes or your Ye's or Candace Owens, those people are legit leaders. They're not, for the Black community necessarily at times, or the way people perceive them as being like a part of the community or a part of, the Black agenda. But those people are leaders nonetheless. And they count, even though they're bad. It can be a myriad of people. But I also don't think that entertainers are good leaders, but they do show themselves as leaders. When they say something, people listen, people follow them, which is pretty much just definition of a leader, which is why you need not just one central person or one central group. You actually need a myriad of people so that, people aren't following one thing, one idea. And two, also, hold up. Oh, the idea that philosophy comes from one person. Philosophy comes from people. Philosophy does come from people, but it comes from the need. It comes from the need of people. Like, I don't think that one person can come up with a philosophy without dealing with the needs of the people. So those ideologies of philosophies have to come from people, yes, but it comes from the needs of the people. So if like slavery exists or any kind of injustice exists, the idea of the philosophy of like a BLM or NAACP, it comes from the needs of a people. So it has to come from the needs of the people, and it doesn't just come from just one person. I mean, one person can write it down, but it doesn't mean that one person is actually the person that's only presenting it. And yeah, that's what I got.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for watching Champions of Discourse presents Debate This. I have been your hostess, Kayla Byers. Be sure to tune in next Thursday.